40. But the fifth commandment is, you shall honor your father and your mother, that it may go well with you and that you might live long in the land. So, as we've been going through these, I know I've referenced a number of times several different catechisms that I've been referring to, that we've been reading from. Those are all very freely and easily available online or on your smartphones if you want to look at them yourselves. I just thought it was an interesting day. I looked at the Orthodox Catechism, which is the primary one for our church. I also looked at the Westminster Shorter Catechism and the Westminster Larger Catechism. So in the Orthodox Catechism, there are two questions for this fifth commandment, 118 and 119. And in our bulletin, we actually printed question 118, but answer 119. So what is the fifth commandment, and then what is God's will for the fifth commandment? The Westminster Shorter Catechism has 4 questions on the fifth commandment. And then the Westminster Larger Catechism has 11 questions and answers going through the fifth commandment. It is a truly massive catechism. Intended for adults. The Shorter Catechism was intended for children. So fifth commandment is to honor your father and your mother, and that it may go well with you, and that you may live long in the land which the Lord your God is giving you to possess. So, what does it mean? Our honor isn't, it's a word that we use, but I feel like we've kind of changed the way that we use it. Like now, mostly when I think about honor, it's like sports awards nights, like people who are getting into the Hall of Fame, or they're being honored with an award, which is related, even though it's a much less important honor, obviously. So, does this honoring your father and mother mean you say to anybody who asks, yeah, I have great parents. They're awesome. They belong in the Parenting Hall of Fame. Is that what it means to honor your father and mother? So there's a couple of very clear and directly scriptural explanations of this fifth commandment. I'm not sure which ones here are all referenced. So in the bulletin, there is a reference to Ephesians 5, verses 21 and 22, which is very instructive. It says, "Children, obey your parents, for this is right." And then verse 22 goes directly to honor your father and mother. So, Paul's clearly saying that part of honoring your parents is obeying them. We also, in 1 Timothy, this is slightly less direct, but when Paul's talking about caring for widows, how does Paul define those who are truly widows? Paul doesn't have the idea of, her husband's not actually dead. I guess it would make sense that this would not be on the top of your minds if you haven't already been thinking about this. Please.
I was going to say, those with no children to
Right.
care for them.
Yes. It says, she who is truly a widow, left all alone, has set her hope on God. It continues in supplication for prayer that day. But if any believing woman has children or grandchildren, let them first learn to show godliness to their own household and make some return to their parents. So that's another part of honoring your father and mother as they age, is providing for them, caring for them. And Jesus uses that same example in one of his debates, not really debate, discussion, argument with the Pharisees, where children were saying to their parents, well, whatever you would have received from me is Corban, it's devoted to the temple, even though I haven't actually given it to the temple yet. But that's what it's devoted for, so I can't use it on you. Right? And what is it? Jesus says that they're setting aside the commandment of God to establish their tradition. Right? Because again, it is this commandment to honor your father and mother that necessitates believers to provide for their parents. So those are the two ways that are, I think, explicitly spelled out in Scripture about honoring your father and your mother. It's that one, you do obey them, and two, you provide for them. So the Orthodox Catechism, in its explanation, says, and again this is on the bulletin, that I honor, love, and be loyal to my father and mother and all those in authority over me. That I obey and submit to them as is proper when they correct and punish me. And also that I be patient with their failings, for through them God chooses to rule us. So, beyond what we've already said, it speaks specifically of submitting to them when they correct and punish me. Probably say discipline instead of punish, but I think we either as parents or as those who have been children know that your parents on occasion have to discipline you, punish you, correct you. And I think that's a sore spot for all of us when we're in that position of being children. We don't like to be punished or disciplined. We don't like to be corrected. And so that will often lead us to dishonor our parents and to effectively reject their authority over us. But in most cases, and certainly when we have Christian parents, that the desire, the goal of the discipline isn't to, break the spirit, demoralize the child. It's to train them in what is right and what is good. This is talked about in Hebrews. Hebrews 11. We all had earthly fathers who disciplined us, and we respected them for it. They disciplined us for a short time, and it seemed best to them. But God does it for our good, that we might share His holiness. So, even in that, in Hebrews, we see that parents are, in a sense, a type of God. Which is also make clear the fact that God reveals Himself to us as our Father. So as we honor our earthly parents, we learn and train ourselves to honor and submit to our Heavenly Father. But we also have to be patient with their failings, because our earthly parents are not perfect. But despite their imperfections, it is through them that God has chosen. God has decided that we would be under the authority of our parents while we were children. That we would be under the authority of various employers, and bosses, and governments even. God has chosen these things. So we ought not to demand that the authorities over us be perfect, and say that, well, as long as my parents are perfect, then I will honor and submit to them. As long as my husband is perfect, then I will honor and submit to him. But he's wrong here, so I'm not going to submit to him. That's not how this works. Sorry, I switched catechism. So, the Westminster Shorter Catechism says what is required in the Fifth Commandment. It says that the Fifth Commandment requires the preserving the honor and performing the duties belonging to everyone in their several places and relations, as superiors, inferiors, or equals. Not inferiors in the sense of being worth less, but simply inferior being in a subordinate position to somebody else, being under the authority of someone else. Do you guys think that is going beyond what the Fifth Commandment actually requires? Or do you think it's a valid implication of the text, to go beyond just fathers and mothers, to get all those who are in positions as superiors to you? So even the Orthodox Catechism, right, which we read, said that I honor, love, and be loyal to my father and mother and all those in authority over me.
I think it's similar in that while you're under that authority, you owe them respect and honor, but your parents are never going to change. Your boss goes over in those types.
They're never going to not be your parents. Yes.
That's what I meant. Yes.
Yes.
In a proper work environment, you have a boss, you also have supervisors, and then you got employees that have been there for a long time, and then you got new employees. And there's kind of a hierarchy, but each level is supposed to be kind of training the lower levels, trying to guide them, if you will, to where they can be promoted to a higher level of authority. So in that sense, it's almost like, parent-child, in that it's more experience, less experience. And Peter talks about the younger should submit themselves to the elders. And so in that sense, yes, but it's not the same as a family relationship.
Right, and I think that's why if we're going to accept the Westminster Shorter Catechism's answer, right, it just says, performing the duties belonging to everyone in their several places and relations, right? So it's not saying that you owe the same duties, to your work supervisor as you do to your parents, but that whatever relationships you do have, right, again, whether it's as superior, inferior, or equal, that you are obligated to God to do whatever you're obligated to do. And that's why the Westminster Larger Catechism is so large, because it goes through what are the duties of superiors, inferiors, and equals, and what is due to your inferiors, superiors, and equals. Right, so Peter writes, render to everyone what is owed to them. Honor to whom honor is owed, reverence to whom reverence is owed. I'm sorry. That's Paul in Romans. Peter said, honor me. So we do, in all of our relations, we have obligations, and we ought to be conscientious in fulfilling those. Right? As parents, you have obligations to provide and instruct and discipline your children, and you're under obligation to God to fulfill those obligations to your children. As a husband, you have obligation to care and protect and guide and provide for your wife. You need to be conscientious in fulfilling that. Wives, you need to be conscientious in your obligations to your husband. Right? If you have a boss or supervisor or manager or whatever levels of authority over you at work, what your obligation to those people are is going to vary based on where you're working and what the policies are. And you have the freedom to leave that workplace, but while you're working there, then you're obligated to God to give what is due to those supervisors. You don't decide that, man, my boss was kind of a jerk today. I think I'm going to sabotage his project. We give to everyone what is due to them. I know we haven't really been using the larger catechism because it's huge, but I did think for today it would be worthwhile to at least read through the duties and sins against superiors, inferiors, and equals. So this is question 127 in the Westminster Larger Catechism. If anyone has questions at any point in this, let me know and stop and talk about it. Otherwise, I plan on just reading through these. So what is the honor that inferiors owe to their superiors? Answer. The honor which inferiors owe to their superiors is all due reverence in heart, word, and behavior, prayer and thanksgiving for them, imitation of their virtues and graces, willing obedience to their lawful commands and counsels, due submission to their corrections, fidelity to defense and maintenance of their persons and authority, according to their several ranks and the nature of their places, bearing with their infirmities and covering them in love, that so they may be an honor to them and to their government. Remember, this was written in the 1600s when England had a king or protector. What are the sins of inferiors against their superiors? The sins of inferiors against their superiors are all neglect of the duties required toward them, envying at, contempt of, and rebellion against their persons and places, in their lawful counsels, commands, and corrections, cursing, mocking, and all such refractory and scandalous carriage as proves a shame and dishonor to them and their government. What is required of superiors towards their inferiors? It is required of superiors, according to the power they receive from God and that relation wherein they stand, to love, pray for, and bless their inferiors, to instruct, counsel, and admonish them, countenancing, commending, and rewarding such as do well, and discountenancing, reproving, and chastising such as do ill, protecting and providing for them all things necessary for soul and body, and by grave, wise, holy, and exemplary carriage to procure glory to God, honor to themselves, and so to preserve that authority which God hath put upon them. What are the sins of superiors? The sins of superiors are, besides the neglect of the duties required of them, an inordinate seeking of themselves their own glory, ease, profit, or pleasure, commanding things unlawful, or not in the power of inferiors to perform, counseling, encouraging, or favoring them in that which is evil, dissuading, discouraging, or discountenancing them in that which is good, correcting them unduly, careless exposing, or leaving them to wrong, temptation, and danger, provoking them to wrath, or any way dishonoring themselves or lessening their authority by an unjust, indiscreet, rigorous, or remiss behavior. And then what are the duties of equals? The duties of equals are to regard the dignity and worth of each other, in giving honor to go one before another, and to rejoice in each other's gifts and advancement as their own. The sins of equals are, besides the neglect of the duties required, the undervaluing of the worth, envying the gifts, grieving at the advancement of or prosperity one of another, and usurping preeminence one over another. So I know that was a lot all at once, and I know it was written in a language for a society that doesn't really pertain today. But we really ought to be mindful. It's different for us in what station of life we're in, but everyone we relate to really is in a position, either we're in authority over them, whether it be children, whether it be someone who's just under you in your department at work, whatever. Either you're an authority over them or they're an authority over you. If it's your parents, if it's you're a supervisor at work, or they're an equal, where this is your next door neighbor, and neither one of you has authority over another. People you meet while you're out shopping or whatnot. So the vast majority of people that we encounter are equals in that sense. But we ought to regularly think about how are we relating to these people, and are we sinning against them, or are we acting properly towards them? Even the cashier at Walmart, who you're only going to see for 30 seconds. I don't know how long. I do self-checkout now. But, even the people driving down the road in front of you. Are we being dismissive or contemptuous of these people? Are we being self-centered? And I just want to make sure I get what I want out of this interaction, and I don't care about you. Or are we valuing them as people created in the image of God, and doing what Christ has commanded us to do towards them? So, do we have any questions? One thing, I know it's really easy, we all know this, and everything is sin. It's really easy to see and focus on how other people are sinning against you or failing to fulfill their responsibilities towards you. And I mean, one of what we read is the responsibility of superiors was to correct those sins. But we need to give equal or more attention to your responsibilities in your position. What do you owe to your husband? What do you owe to your wife? And let's strive to make sure that we're doing what we need to do in our position. Not just being upset that my wife isn't submitting enough to me. So. Hope that was helpful. Okay, we didn't talk about this, but Paul makes a point that this is the first commandment with a promise, that it may go well with you and that you may live long in the land. Right? And this isn't a perfect guarantee that, well, if you listen to your parents, you're going to live to be 100, or you're going to make $1 million. But it is, one, it's honoring to God when we obey all His commandments. But this one particularly, it is to our good when we honor our parents and obey them and submit to them. And again, more when we properly fulfill our obligations to those in authority over us. It is to our good. So in general, your life will go better. You listen to your parents, especially talking to teenagers. That also means, as parents dealing with often rebellious children, that we need to remember and gently remind them that you're seeking to exercise authority over them for their good, not for your own benefit. When we're tempted to grumble and rebel against the authority over us, we ought to be slow to grumble. And thank God for the authorities He has established.